Hey guys, we're just going to finish out chapter one for human neuropsych. Just want to kind of reiterate some things that we'd covered in class and very briefly go over just a few more slides left, but I really wanted to make sure you guys kind of got an idea of some of these basic concepts. So we talked about the hominid brain and talked about the Australopithecus, we talked about the Homo, and modern Homo sapiens. And so here we looked at the skulls of the Australopithecus afarensis, which is all the way to the left, the Homo erectus, which is in the middle, and then the modern Homo sapien, which is to the right. And just reminding you guys that, of course, some of these early hominids we don't have full fossils for. We only have bits and pieces, as you can see. From the one all the way to the left, the Australopithecus afarensis, you can see there as having the structures filled in with essentially what looks like clay or putty, but that just to maintain the structure of the skull. But you can see how small the skull is compared to the modern Homo sapien. And so the question is why is it that these skulls were evolving to get bigger and bigger? And so there are a few theories here. None of them are confirmed as to be the absolute case. There are a lot of questions. Each one has their own sort of, positives and negatives. So here, one major suggestion, which has a lot of evidence for, is a changing climate. So we know that the Earth's climate changes, regularly over the course of the 4.5 billion years that the Earth has been in existence. We know that even in the past few 100,000 years, that the climate has changed considerably. And so here we can see in this particular picture that the climate changed in a particular region that we have found a lot of different fossils in Africa and in the Middle East and things like that. And even in Europe, seeing some of the newer hominids there, we can see that the trees the idea that the grasslands really took over where the trees were. And so if the grasslands were spreading due to the climate changing, then that meant that all of the animals that got their food and being adapted in trees had to make a change. And that means that if we're going to be, if a species is going to be on a flat land or a grassland versus in the tree, instead of having a tail, instead of, being able to live in the trees, then we need to see that the species evolves to adapt to this grassland climate or landscape by becoming upright and being able to do things like build tools and weapons. And so we think that one of the reasons why we see this change in brain structure and enlarging brains is simply because that the adaptation was necessary for survival to the changing landscape. And so, of course, we also talked about lifestyle and what primates were doing in terms of foraging behavior. And that tends to be more complex when an animal is looking for fruit, for example, because we need to be able to distinguish fruit from other vegetation. And so that means that we need really good color vision. We need to have really good sensory information. We need to be able to see different hues, to be able to identify and differentiate different kinds of fruits and different kinds of foods. We need really good spatial skills. And if we're going to have an upright posture and we're going to be able to have really good depth perception, then, a good thing to have is eyes that are facing forward instead of on the sides of your head. Really good spatial skills, as well as memory skills, knowing where those bushes are that contain that fruit, where those trees are that contain that fruit. And we do tend to see that fruit eaters have a larger brain. So it could be that, this foraging behavior, this lifestyle is what either led to an enlarged brain or an enlarged brain perhaps led to this lifestyle. And so here you can see the spider monkey diet consists 72% of fruit, whereas the howler monkey diet only gets about 42% of its nutrients from fruit. And you can see that with a brain size of 107 grams, a spider monkey brain is much larger than the howler monkey brain, which is only about 50 grams. So it's over double the size, and you can see that they get a lot more of their nutrients from fruit, and they need that, they need that bigger brain and the more capacity to be able to locate those different fruits. Another theory as to why the hominid brain enlarged was presented by Falk in the 90s, and he called this the radiator hypothesis. And essentially it's, your brain is very active, so it's going to generate more heat. And so when we look at, for example, the Homo species compared to the Australopithecus, they had much more widely dispersed blood flow, and that allowed for increased brain size. So this increased blood circulation needed to have improved brain cooling, which then allowed for the hominid brain sizes to actually increase to accommodate for those changes. And so that's perhaps why we saw some structural changes in the skulls. And it doesn't necessarily mean, just because each of these are their own hypothesis or own theories, doesn't necessarily mean that, one is right over the other. It could be that, it could have been the change in landscape along with, this, different brain activity that could, have led to an enlarged brain, the enlarging of the brain. And it could have started with a simple, set of mutations. We unfortunately, these are just speculatory. Or speculation. So another theory is from Stedman and that group is simply that it was started with a genetic mutation. And that genetic mutation led to smaller facial muscles, smaller bones in the face, which required us to change our diet. That couldn't have meant change in terms of fruit, or change in terms of we had to come out of trees, and then that of course lead to increased brain size across the hominids. And so again, some of these theories can actually or ideas can actually work together, and some of them may, pieces of all of these might actually be correct. Neoteny is another particular idea where we talk about the rate of maturation of the brain is slowed. We talked a little bit about this in class, and about how an infant or a fetus in utero really has only so much time to mature, and that maturation has to be done outside of the womb. So we talk about this sort of idea of a fourth trimester almost, and that the maturation is slowed down, because if you do all the maturing in utero, then of course your head's going to be too big to come out, and the species won't survive childbirth. So when we slow down the maturation, and then we slow down the process even after the infant is born, right? So there's still a large amount of maturation that has to take place. We know that the human brain isn't fully mature until 25 years old, right? So when we have this slow maturing of the brain, it allows more brain cells to be produced, and allows that process more time. So in response to that, we see that, of course, here,